いい出来だぞ。上がナスビで下がピーナッツだから、ピーナッツと名付けよう。
You, might want to go with a different name. Welcome, everyone, to Dai Sentai Goggle V. So, the Marvel era is done. The last 3 entries in the Super Sentai series have all been very interesting. Battle Fever J finalized the basic formula that makes this franchise what it is. Denshi Sentai Denjiman made an effort to tell a grander story than any before, and Taiyo Sentai Sun Vulcan was bad. Okay, it had plenty of interesting firsts for the series, like having a team of 3, a combinable mech, and it tried to continue the story where Denjiman left off. The reason I mention all the innovations and accomplishments that the previous few seasons have brought in is because, well, Dai Sentai Goggle V doesn't really do any of that. Most of the interesting things in this show come less from what it actually brings to the table and more from just how weird it is. Not much is actually known about Goggle V's production, so there's not much to say on the matter. It's seemingly meant to be a bit more back to basics with the 5-person format returning, but it feels like Toei didn't really know what to do creatively following Sun Vulcan. Hirohisa Soda has officially been brought on as head writer, a position he'll remain in for a long time. Alongside him, we have Takayuki Suzuki, making his debut as chief producer, after being assistant producer for Sun Vulcan. With Shozo Uehara and Suzumu Yoshikawa gone, this makes Goggle V the first season to not feature any primary staff members from the Go Ranger days. However, you still feel a lot of that DNA, partly because Chumei Watanabe is still here composing his final Sentai for many years, and Hirohisa Soda definitely hasn't gotten super into the main writer role just yet. Goggle V is easily the least interesting of his work. I get the sense this is a much more transitionary season before Dynaman really got to change things up in terms of how the show felt. Despite this, you can definitely see Soda's quirks starting to show, and his innovation of what Sentai is started here. I also think this season is the first of 3 that are very similar thematically, and you could say there's a sense of progression from here to Bioman. Regardless, there's still plenty to talk about with Goggle V, so let's get right into it. Let's start with the opening. Yeah, for the first time we have the Rangers yelling their team name at the start of the intro. This is pretty much a staple of Sentai that's stuck around for a long time, and I like it. It's fun, and part of me wishes they still did it today. As for the actual song, well, much like most of this show, it's okay. I really like the second half of the song, particularly the chorus where it really feels like a heroic chant, but the first bit feels kinda like we have Sun Vulcan at home. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but these songs are really similar. It was sung by Mojo, the same person who did the songs for Battle Fever as well as Dynaman next year. We open on the German Alps as scientist Dr. Hongo drives to Bergwolf Castle in search of a supposed ancient civilization. At the same time, someone is out climbing the mountains. His name is Kenichi Akama, an explorer searching a cave. The 2 of them happen upon the exact same ruins and come face to face with said civilization, the ancient empire Death Dark. First a criminal organization named Crime, and now a dark empire of death named Death Dark. These villains need to come up with better names. Anyway, Kenichi protects Dr. Hongo from some evil foot soldiers, and the doctor calls in the Future Science Laboratory to form Dai Sentai Goggle V. That laboratory is run by the Computer Boys and Girls, as they're called, though it'd be more accurate to say Computer Boys and Girls, since there's only one. Tatsuya, Makoto, Haruo, Daisuke, and Akane. Child labor. Hey, you look familiar. The Computer Boys and Girls, or Comboy for short, are responsible for selecting the candidates to become Goggle V. We're really leaving the creation of humanity's only hope in the hands of children. Cutting to Deathtopia, the name of Death Dark's castle, we get a proper introduction to our villains. We have General Deathkiller, this Skeletor-looking dude who will be our Resident Evil General character, Mazurka, who has one of the weirdest looking outfits I've ever seen, as well as Dr. Zazoria and Dr. Iguana, both of whom wear these animal-themed outfits. They are all led by Führer Taboo, and I really like this design. He's encased within this window, so you can't really make out how he looks aside from the silhouette and his giant glowing Cyclops eye. He's pretty cool looking and intimidating. Under Taboo's orders, Deathtopia rises to the surface, setting course for, you guessed it, Japan. This place really is the land of inconveniences, huh? Anyway, it's about time to meet our new Rangers as the Computer Boys and Girls approach each of them. Saburo Aoyama, who's playing some ice hockey, Futoshi Kijima, who's feeding the animals, Miki Momozono practicing gymnastics, and finally Kanpei Kuroda playing shogi. Each of them gets pulled inside a telephone box by the kids, but instead of being bigger on the inside, it's just an elevator, leading them into the future science laboratory, but it doesn't get any less annoying. They receive their changers and, oh yeah, I forgot to talk about the Sun Vulcan ones. I guess I'll just slot that in here, since these ones are pretty much the same thing. These are the goggle braces, and they look alright. I like the stylized number design on them, but I think I preferred the animal emblems on the Vol braces, which in turn weren't quite as nice looking as the Denji rings for me, but it works. This type of wristwatch changer is pretty much the standard for the Showa era. It'll be quite a while before they actually start switching it up with the designs. They all transform, and Dr. Hongo gives them some exposition about the gems on their foreheads. Each of them represents a different ancient civilization. Red's is a ruby, representing Atlantis. Black's is an emerald, representing ancient Asian civilizations, which is kind of vague. Blue's is a sapphire, representing ancient Egypt. Yellow's is an opal, representing Mu. Don't think it's all that well handled. We finally get a good look at the monster that's been running around. All the monsters in this one are called Mozus, and I really like the running design style they have. Each of them is based on some kind of animal, but they're also part robots, almost like chimeras. This is translated into their design by having half of them be organic and the other half robotic. And you know I like me some half-and-half designs. We also have our foot soldiers called Spotmen. They have these cool abstract designs that actually work to make the spandex suits look a bit rougher, like a rock. The Rangers arrive on their vehicles and, much like Sun Vulcan, do their roll call on top of a building. I guess that's just a thing. Okay, where do I even begin with these outfits? The Goggle 5 suits are rough. Much like the show itself, it feels like they didn't really know what they were doing. I don't think I like a single aspect of these suits. They look really cluttered and ill-fitting, and they also look really cheaply made. It kind of feels like they're trying to reinvent the Denji Man suits, but they really just made them worse. Let's just start from the top. These helmets are really ugly. I'm not sure what you could have done to make them better, but the mix of the accents around the visors coupled with the overly detailed mouthpieces with molded lips is just really unappealing to me. They're also inconsistent, with red and black having more bronze or copper looking accents while the rest are silver. I would understand if it was just red with a different color, since this series has a habit of making the Red Rangers more special, but why black too? It's not like silver would have looked worse on black, so why does he have to get the bronze? I don't mind the gemstones on the helmets, and that's just about the only positive I can find. Then we have the scarves, which, yeah. Reaching the chest area, we have these cheap Goggle 5 emblems that look like they're about to fall off at any given moment. And finally, we have the most iconic part of these suits, take that however you will, the white chest piece, or as I like to call them, the bibs. They look like bibs. This isn't helped by the fact that they don't wrap around the back, so they just awkwardly stop right there, making them look unfinished. This first fight scene is just wonderful. It starts off as a pretty standard Sentai fight, but then the team pulls out their weapons and... oh boy. This is where the cracks in the budget seemingly start to show. Their weapons are gymnastics based. Red has a rope, which acts similarly to Aqua Ranger's Red Butte, except instead of having a unique design, it's literally just a goddamn rope. Black has these glorious clubs, which work surprisingly well as weapons, and are probably my favorites in this one. Blue has a hula hoop. That's it. Just a blue hula hoop. He literally just throws it and the foot soldiers fall down without even being hit. Yellow has a ball that he just throws at people, though he does get a spiked variant later in the show. And Pink has ribbons, and hey, this one actually ties into her profession that we saw in the beginning. That's neat. I actually really like the ribbons too. They make for some really fun action. I also like that every ranger can use each other's weapons, which we see here demonstrated with the ribbons. But yeah, it really just feels like they couldn't afford to make actual props, so they just took whatever they had lying around in the storage closet. I also struggle to understand what gymnastics has to do with anything that's going on in this show thematically. They use their batons to form their finishing blow, the Goggle Victory Flash, where they do this pose and the weapons form into a V-shape to hit the monster. After that, Taboo orders the two doctors to send out the giant robots they built, known as Kongs. The robot revives the dead monster and beams it up to pilot it. I like that the giant robot looks completely different from the regular monster, adds a bit of spice. Oh wait, this only lasts until episode 4? To fight this, the team sends out Goggle Caesar, and here comes one of my major problems with the season, just from a quality of life perspective. The mech transformation sequence takes way too damn long. It takes 5 whole minutes from the moment the giant monster is sent out to the robot battle actually happening. This happens every episode, and it completely kills the pacing. After episode 3, I just started skipping these whole sequences. The fights themselves also don't do anything interesting that wasn't done in the previous shows, so I kinda recommend skipping those too, to be honest. I've complained before about mech fights feeling forced and drawn out, but Goggle 5 has to be the worst offender of this by far. The second the Rangers use their finisher, I completely check out. As for the mech itself, it looks okay. I like the primary red color, and the rocket-shaped head, although goofy, is a staple of this era, so I'll let it slide. As far as weapons go, we've got pretty much the exact same lineup as Sun Vulcan, except the shield doesn't spin anymore. Why does it feel like the mecha have been evolving backwards ever since Battle Fever? Also, for some reason, red, blue, and yellow are the only ones who actually get to use the mech. I'm gonna go out on a limb and assume that the season was originally meant to only have 3 Rangers like Sun Vulcan, but the other 2 were added late into production. Late enough that I guess they couldn't redesign the mech to work with 5 users? Which is kind of stupid since they wouldn't need to redesign the mech at all, just film the other 2 Rangers in the cockpit with them. This is a gripe that I have with surprisingly not just this season. I hate it when 5-person teams have 3-person mechs. This is not the only time in the franchise this happens, and it's a little annoying. It kind of takes away from the core aspect of Sentai, teamwork, when 2 valuable members of the team are forced to just sit back and watch as the other 3 take on the threat. The mech's finisher is called Electric Galaxy Slash, and... Yep, here we go again. They defeat the monster and Death Dark retreats for the time being. The team returns to base and are congratulated by the computer boys and girls. I actually really like this ending theme. It starts off a little slow, but I like the vibe, and it really picks up after a bit. Once it starts speeding up, it's kind of a bop. The countdown bit is really catchy, and I just love the bit at the very end. I don't know why that part is so satisfying. The visuals are false advertising, though. We see each ranger traveling to a different part of the world, helping people out, but this literally never happens in the show. The team never leaves Japan. As I've mentioned, this is the last Sentai to be soundtracked by Chumi Watanabe, and he actually brings out a lot of new tunes in this one. We still get the occasional repeat from Battle Fever, but I like the songs here. Still, I'm alright with saying goodbye to Watanabe for now. His sound may have defined this era of Sentai, but we're moving on to a new era now. Episode 2 gives us a little more information about where Death Dark came from. Dr. Hongo explains they've been around for a while, apparently being the ones who came up with the idea to create weapons out of iron during the time of the Hittites. Of course, it was humanity itself that ultimately did all that, but this development certainly sells the evil of this threat. The team vows to work together with Dr. Hongo and the computer boys and girls to defeat Death Dark, and then Dr. Hongo leaves and- wait, what? Yeah, he just dips. I don't know why they decided to do this. Maybe the actor didn't feel like committing to this show all year, but there he goes. We officially have a winner for the Most Useless Mentor award, and I don't think he's getting topped anytime soon. We've only known you for like a day, dude. Episode 6 sees the return of Ken Omae, who played Banriki in Denji-Man, and he plays an extremely similar monster to the week here, which is fun. Like in previous Sentai, Goggle V does have a movie, but it's not very important. Unlike Denji-Man, there's nothing to really talk about here story-wise. But I do always like seeing these old Showa shows in a higher definition. Episode 10 is where the pre-opening gag came from, and that speaks for itself, but it's also noticeable for the appearance of actor Satoshi Yokita, who will actually go on to play our next Red Ranger. Look at that. We get a bit of development for Futoshi in episode 13, where he reunites with his long-lost father. It's a surprisingly sweet episode, and it does hit the feels pretty well. It's good to cherish these moments of genuine character development, because Goggle V doesn't have a lot of that. Episode 15, The Reawakened Commander, is our next actually important episode, as we get introduced to Commander Deathmark. A mysterious coffin arrives at Deathtopia with the words Deathmark inscribed on it, or for the purpose of translation, Deathmark. He's seemingly a legendary figure in Death Dark history, and he's been asleep for 2,000 years. The coffin opens up, and out comes this pharaoh-looking guy. His design's pretty cool, and he's immediately threatening as he overtakes everyone else in the room. He also summons his 2 guards, Bella and Beth. They look like upgraded mooks wearing those protective cone things you usually put on dogs. He also smokes a weird dragon-shaped pipe. I guess that explains the raspy voice. Iguana and Zazoria send out a bee-themed monster to attack, which extracts the life out of people and makes them super old. I haven't seen that one before. Granted, in Denji-Man, the whole old people thing was played almost entirely for comedy, whereas here, they actually make it pretty terrifying. Especially when one of the victims is Tatsuya, one of the computer boys and girls, and, a child. So seeing him this old and weak is pretty disturbing. In a further shocking turn of events, Iguana and Zazoria return to Deathtopia having failed to extract enough life force to satisfy Fear Taboo, so Deathmark just fucking kills them on the spot! That's one way to introduce your powerful new villain. It's a shame these 2 didn't get to do anything else, but it's not like I particularly cared about them anyway, so we're not missing much. We also get a one-on-one battle between Kenichi and General Deathkiller to save Tatsuya's life. I always like these fights, and it's extra tense when the Red Ranger can't call for help. Ultimately, the others come in clutch to recover the life extract to save everyone, defeating Bimozu in the process. With the promise of a new threat and the disposal of 2 villains in one episode, it seems like this show is getting interesting. At least, that's what I thought. From this point on, the entire show just dawdles until the finale. There's some interesting stuff here and there, and I'll talk about it, but my god, this show is kind of exhausting to get through. I only recommend this one if you don't mind that pretty much all of it is just filler. This is part of what I meant when I said this was a transitional season. With Hirohisa Soda now in charge, the Super Sentai series would begin to evolve into a much more story-centric show within the following seasons, particularly the next two. Goggle V was pretty much just a warm-up. Of course, for an audience in the 1980s comprised of children, this obviously wasn't a problem. They had no issue watching a self-contained story every week with no hanging threads, but for a fan binging the show nowadays, yeah, this gets boring real fast. Speaking of audiences, this leads me to a topic I haven't really discussed that much yet because it hasn't been very prominent until now. I usually just talk about Sentai's popularity in Japan and how those audiences reacted to each season, but Super Sentai wasn't just popular in Japan. Goggle V is the point where I really want to start talking about international versions of Sentai aired in different countries. It wasn't the first season to be aired, but it was the first one to be this well documented. Still, the show has been making its mark since the very beginning. Did you know Go Ranger aired in the US back in the 70s? It aired prominently in Hawaii and even made it to California at some point. More prominently, it aired in 2 other Asian countries aside from Japan, each with their own unique dub of the show, China and the Philippines. Not much is known about the former, but if you're a fan of Super Sentai, I'm sure you've heard mumblings about the Filipino dub. Both Go Ranger and Jaka got dubs that aired there. The dubs were known respectively as Star Rangers and Lucky Aces, and these are probably the most prominent cases of lost media in the fandom. Thankfully, a handful of Go Rangers episodes have been recovered, and you can watch them online if you know where to look, but nothing has ever come up from Lucky Aces. The dub itself is not great, but it's a nice piece of history, and it makes for some laughs. Moving back to Goggle V, the show also aired in the Philippines, albeit much later in the late 90s. Before that, it made its way to Italy alongside Dejiman and, most prominently, Brazil. Goggle V wasn't the first Sentai to air in Brazil, and it certainly wasn't the most popular. Oh, I can't wait to get to that one. But it was a commendable success. It's always weird to think that Super Sentai was actually decently well known outside of Japan over a decade before Power Rangers came around. In fact, Power Rangers kinda hampered it. As soon as they made it big, all international distribution of Super Sentai ceased. So yeah, I'll be going into more detail on the international releases of these seasons, particularly 2 of them. Episode 20 is pretty funny. The monster is a sombrero-wearing cactus who plays his guitar and disorients his enemies, and Miki has this fun scene where she disguises herself to fool it, and... This show has a lot of really funny moments out of context. Speaking of Miki disguising herself, episode 22 is my favorite focus episode for her. The monster in this episode possesses a bunch of discarded and abandoned dolls and brings them to life to enact their revenge on the children who left them behind. Why does Death Dark care about this? How did this help you guys conquer the world? Whatever. Miku knocks out each of the dolls one by one by disguising herself. Of all the quick change episodes, as I've come to call them, this is probably my favorite so far. I also just love her clown disguise. She pulls it off so well. Episode 26 is the first episode where Kanpei actually does something. The monster is a boar who throws bombs that erase people's memories. He shoots one at Kanpei, who proceeds to get all woozy. He claims not to remember who any of his teammates are, and then runs away. From that point, the rest of the whole episode is a gigantic chase scene where Death Dark tries to capture Kanpei and he keeps dodging them, also kicking their butts in the process. This episode exists purely to show off Junichi Harusa's brilliant stunt work, and I love it. Oh yeah, and at the end it's revealed that Kanpei never actually lost his memories, and this is all just a part of an elaborate plan to send Death Dark on a wild goose chase and distract them from taking the other Rangers down. This is easily the standout episode for this character, and probably my favorite in the entire season. Kanpei's awesome stunts continue into later in the show as well. He really is the best. Episode 34 introduces us to a new type of metal Mozu that Death Dark sends out, which was created by a scientist they kidnapped because Deathmark wants to marry his daughter. Okay? It's far more powerful and resistant than any of the previous monsters, as the Rangers have a hard time fighting it, and none of their weapons or attacks seem to work on it, not even their finisher. Anyway, Kanpei tries to create a weapon powerful enough to pierce the monster's iron skin. Using a clue given to them by the scientist's daughter, the Rangers manage to figure out the structure of the metal, upgrading the Goggle Sabers and creating a brand new finishing weapon, the Goggle Spear. They all jump in the air, forming a V symbol, and do, that. Finally, Red throws the spear at the monster. Except the way they filmed it looks like he's just awkwardly dropping it. Do you maybe have a take where the suit actor doesn't just drop the spear? This is the finisher they use for the rest of the show, and it always looks this bad. But hey, at least it's unique, and it fits with the gymnastics theme the season has been leaning towards. Episode 39 is really cool and creative. The monster uses this evil picture book to suck people in. Remember that one episode of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers? Yeah, it's like that. It's also a pretty good episode for Miki, since she's a complete badass here. Now we reach one of my personal favorites, episode 41, The Great Adventure of a Transformed Papa. In this episode, Death Dark creates a suit of armor that enhances your strength and resistance. However, the armor ends up in the hands of this random-ass security guard dad, who puts it on and basically becomes Superman. He starts fighting crime and wants to help Goggle 5 take down Death Dark. The suit looks really stupid, but I kinda live for it. He's also just really wholesome as a character. All he wants to do is impress his kid with his cool new superpowers. Eventually, he decides that he doesn't need to be a superhero and his son loves him the way he is. It's nice and sweet, but man, part of me wishes he got to keep the suit. Bring him back in the finale, cowards! Episode 44 is kinda brutal. Futoshi gets infected by a monster, so any food he touches will instantly turn to sand. Honestly, making a focus episode about the Big Eater character where they become unable to eat is such an obvious move that I'm honestly shocked they never tried it with Daita and Go Ranger. Or maybe they did and I don't remember. Go Ranger was long, man. Futoshi takes it hard. He starts going insane from always being so close yet so far away. I honestly really feel for the guy. The next one is also really fun, as a Tanuki monster uses a ninja technique to shapeshift into Kanpei. This episode is super funny. I usually don't like imposter episodes because they all follow the same pattern. The fake knocks out or incapacitates the real one, and or the real one gets possessed by something, then blends into the group, acts really suspiciously for the whole episode until eventually someone on the team realizes something's up, and then the real one is saved. It's really predictable, and it gets boring real fast, and honestly, I've never done well with this type of plotline. Just watching the fake one get away with doing all sorts of suspicious stuff and nobody batting an eye always just got really frustrating with me, no matter what show I was watching. This episode seems like it's going in that direction at first, when the Tanuki Mozu beats up Kanpei and takes his form, lying to the rest of the team about what happened, but just before they all go back to base, the real Kanpei gets back up and comes back, instantly informing the team of what's going on. After that, we just get a really fun episode of Tanuki Mozu trying and failing to impersonate each of the Rangers to a hilarious degree. We even get a cool Kanpei v Kanpei fight, even if you can sometimes tell the body double doesn't quite look the same. Once again, we get some more great Junichi Haruta stunts as both Kanpeis try to prove to the other team who the real one is by pulling off all these different jumps. At one point, he tries turning into Miki, and they manage to find him out because he doesn't know what pose to do for the roll call. Then he multiplies himself and turns himself into a full team of Goggle 5 clones for them to fight. Also this. Yeah, I don't know what's up with that. With episode 46, Super Energy Arrival, it's time to get to the finale. Yeah, already. That was fast. A friend of Kenichi's, named Toyama, pitches a plan to create a city of the future. What that means is pretty vague, but the important thing is that he gets killed by Death Dark immediately after. Goggle 5 find out what happened and go look for the monster, a skunk monster who farts on people and gives them hallucinations. He sprays Kenichi with his gas, causing him to start seeing things. They really just filmed this fight in front of the green screen and didn't even bother adding any kind of background behind it. It turns out Death Dark was actually looking for an energy source named Hydron, which starts pouring out of this mountain. It's a shiny rock and it looks pretty. Deathkiller captures Kenichi and takes the energy. In order to test the power of Hydron, they decide to use Kenichi as a lab rat. We get a bit of background on Hydron and where it came from through the Comboys, having crashed on Earth in a meteor ages ago. The rest of the team comes to the rescue and saves Kenichi, who proceeds to drop a bomb on top of the Hydron rock. That's not enough, however, as after the death of Skunk Mozu, Death Dark still manages to get their hands on the energy by landing their castle on top of the radiated mountain. This cliffhanger leads us into the next episode. This is the ultimate weapon.
Patrick, that's the ultimate weapon.
Anyway, now that they have the Hydron, Deathmark develops a brand new machine to control it. And this thing looks like it was built in an afternoon out of different prop parts they had lying around. Anyway, this thing is meant to control Hydron, which is apparently able to break matter down into its atomic form. They use this to create a teleporter so they can get around without Goggle 5 following them, but their ultimate plan is to create a big cannon that will infinity war everything on Earth. The shield around the castle makes it so the Rangers can't get inside it, so they try to find another way in. They run into a turtle monster that Death Dark created, who got lost after an accident with the Hydron teleported him in a random direction. They kidnap a child to use as a hostage to distract the Rangers while they keep working on the cannon behind the scenes. They of course take the bait, but they still manage to reach the cannon in the nick of time and destroy it before it goes off. Still, Deathtopia absorbed all the Hydron, so they've got more plans for the stuff. The villains escape with their dark cannon in tow, and Deathmark gives Mazurka a special task. Offering to promote her above Deathkiller, who he seemingly doesn't trust, he showers her in Hytron to turn her invisible, which is not how Hytron works according to what they said in the last 2 episodes, but whatever, I guess this thing just does whatever the plot needs it to. Either way, he tasks her with using her new invisibility powers to sneak aboard Goggle V's vehicles and infiltrate their HQ. What she doesn't know is that Deathmark secretly implanted a bomb inside her body during the Hytron surgery, and he's just using her as a pawn. The team gets wind that something is making its way inside the base, but they can't pinpoint what it is since they can't see it. A monster sends them on a wild goose chase while Mazurka looks for the control room, with Deathkiller waiting outside. The convoys can't really do anything about it while the Rangers are out fighting the monster, and Mazurka slippity slides down to the control room and starts blowing up the entire room, breaking all the team's machinery and opening the door for Deathkiller to follow her in. And then we get this hilarious interaction. Since the bomb hasn't blown up automatically like it was supposed to, Deathkiller tries to pull the trigger himself, but the Rangers return before he can get out of the room. He and Mazurka have a wrestling match for the switch, and she ultimately decides to kamikaze herself, blowing up the bomb and taking everyone down with her. The command center is utterly destroyed, and Goggle Caesar is left flying aimlessly in circles. After that honestly pretty awesome cliffhanger, Tatsuya washes up on a factory and is found by 2 workers. He runs out looking for everyone, but breaks down when he can't find them, and I'm sorry, I just can't take this scene seriously. This kid is not a great actor, and his pained cries over everyone being dead do not come off as sincere. They end up being accidentally hilarious. Of course, he's found by the others, and they all reunite at the wreck of their base. It's good that they're all alive, but they still can't do anything against Deathdark now that their HQ has been blown up. Even worse, Deathkiller gets up from the rubble, so I guess he survived, but he does faint immediately. Despite the fact that this is, well, Deathkiller, Kenichi still suggests that they heal him, to the shock of everyone else. His explanation is that he wants Deathkiller to understand how lucky he is to be alive, and to rethink all the lives he's taken, but you know that's probably not gonna work. While they're healing him, they get attacked by a Mozu. They fight, and Deathkiller even saves them as a way to repay them for healing him, but he collapses. They're still having a hard time fighting when all of a sudden, Goggle Caesar comes back and fires some missiles at the monster. But wait, if the team isn't able to control Goggle Caesar, then who's inside? Well... Oh, now you decide to show up and help! Seriously, Dr. Hongo has to be one of the most useless characters in all of Sentai. The dude formed this team and gave them all their powers, and then instead of actually trying to be a mentor and help them, he just dips and leaves everything in the hands of these literal children. And then all of a sudden, right at the end, after all the battles that he wasn't there for, he comes back like, "Hey everyone, sorry I didn't do anything to help during this entire battle, but hey, we have a secret hidden control room that we never told you about." He's like a dad who went to get milk and then comes back 20 years later. Oh yeah, he leads them to a brand new command center in the mountains. So, let's see. The whole Goggle 5 team is still alive, the computer boys and girls are still alive, Deathkiller is still alive, the Rangers can still use all their weapons and mecha in this new control center. So basically, Mazurka's death didn't mean anything. She didn't accomplish anything with her last act of rebellion. She just killed herself for no reason. Great. Deathkiller secretly follows them and immediately tells Deathmark about their new hideout. I'm not gonna say I told you so, but... So they're already under attack, but the Rangers fight off their forces. After Bear Mozu is defeated, Deathkiller goes rogue and decides to pilot the giant monster robot himself to take down the Rangers. This dude is going off the rails, he's screaming and lashing out. They launch Goggle Caesar and engage Deathkiller in a pretty close call of a battle. He puts up a great fight, but is ultimately done in. This leaves Deathmark and Fuhrer Taboo as the last men standing. Time for the final battle. Deathmark announces the completion of the Dark Cannon. Deathtopia rises back to the surface and Goggle 5 shows up to fight Deathmark. He immediately wipes the floor with them, beating them up with his dark sword and knocks them right out. They return to base bruised and battered while Deathdark sets course for Tokyo. He also tries to steal Goggle Caesar to use it in his attack. The Rangers bounce back and charge into Deathtopia. Not entirely sure how they got in there or what happened to that shield that was stopping them before. As they fight through waves of mooks, we get our classic each member gets left behind to deal with a specific threat scene. Futoshi holds back a bunch of spotmen, allowing the others to move on. Miki and Aoyama stay behind to fight some agents. And Kanpei holds back some skeleton knights. I guess Deathmark has those now, allowing Kenichi to reach the main room, where he comes face to face with Deathmark and Taboo. During the battle, Kenichi accidentally breaks Taboo's window, finally revealing his true form. And yep, he looks just about how I expected. A sort of swampy-looking monster. He claims to be the ultimate genetic combination, created using powerful genes. Who created him? How? Why? Who cares? The show doesn't. Still, this is the point where I realized what the show was really going for in terms of theme, and something I think the next season handles a lot better. Scientific progress. The Goggle 5 members each represent ancient civilizations that opened the door for humanity to progress to what it is today. In the same vein, Death Dark boasts of being the most advanced empire there is. Again, not to spoil the next video, but yeah, Dynaman does a way better job at conveying this. Deathtopia lands in a quarry as usual, and the fight against Deathmark begins. The Rangers fight their way through some goons and reach the man himself, and they still get beaten around a bunch. I'll give it to him, he's good. But the Rangers manage to strike back and break his dark sword, blowing him up. Now it's off to Taboo, who turns giant. He beats up the mecha for a bit until Dr. Hongo tells them to use their energy sword to reflect the Hytron back at him. And then they don't do that. They just use their regular finisher. But it's not over yet, as Taboo decides to pull a Varun and splits his body in half, becoming a floating torso. I imagine the crew had a ton of fun swinging this Taboo costume back and forth for this fight scene, but the team goes for the classic move of stab the big glowing eye and finally destroy Führer Taboo. They all walk out into the field where Dr. Hongo delivers a final speech about how the end of Death Dark doesn't mean that all dark science is gone, since humanity will likely continue to indulge in evil work. Despite this, it's up to us to teach the next generation to use science for good. Goggle 5 heads off, leaving the future of the world in the hands of said next generation, the computer boys and girls. And that's the end of the season. This is an alright finale for an alright show. I don't think it does anything plainly wrong, aside from maybe Mazurka's death being kinda irrelevant, and it delivers its message well enough. As I mentioned before, I actually think this season is the first in a sort of thematic trilogy for Sentai that I'll get more into later. This and the next two seasons all have a very scientific motif and handle the topic of how science and scientific progress is used for good and evil. And as I mentioned, those next seasons do a better job with the theme in my opinion. Now then, let's talk about those characters. Kenichi Akama, played by Ryoji Akagi, is yet another basic heroic leader type. It'll be a few seasons yet before I actually have anything to say about the Reds in these shows. He's not bad or anything, but he is exceedingly generic and uninteresting. Definitely tied with Blue for my least favorite in the bunch. Speaking of which, Saburo Aoyama is Goggle Blue. He was played by Shigeki Ishii. He's an ice hockey player and he's good with kids, and that's about all there is to him. He does have one good focus episode in episode 8. When a professor is targeted by Death Dark because her research could be useful for their evil plans, she and her guards at Interpol send a decoy to be taken by Death Dark in her place. As soon as Aoyama finds out about this, he goes out and risks it all to save the decoy despite her perceived lack of importance in the grand scheme of things. I really like this scene, and it was pretty much the only time I got something of note out of this character. Next we have Kanpei Kuroda, Goggle Black. He really didn't do much for me at first. He was the scientist guy who barely got any focus, and he seemed to really fade into the background a lot. Which is a shame, because his focus episodes are the best ones, and we don't get any until halfway through the season. But at some point, it seems like his actor got more comfortable in the role and started to inject some more charisma into the character, which I appreciate. But of course, the main thing everyone remembers from this character, or rather, from the actor Junichi Haruta, is his acrobats. Junichi Haruta, much like Kenji Oba before him, was a stunt actor before landing a main role. Because of this, he did all of his own stunts on the show, and in my opinion, he's honestly even more impressive than Oba. One of my favorite fight scenes in this season is when he fights off an army of foot soldiers on a moving truck, completely untransformed. It's glorious. This dude has some insanely crazy stunts. By the end of the show, he had become my favorite, and he's only gonna get better next season. Wait, what do you mean next season? Futoshi Kijima, played by Sanpei Godai, is Goggle Yellow. I really can't think of a better way to describe this guy other than budget Daita. It's all there, the goofiness, the boisterousness, the big appetite. He's pretty much Key Ranger to a T. As much as I hate Asao from the previous season, at least he tried to do something different with the archetype. Boy, this is coming off as really negative. I don't think Kijima is bad or anything. He had some pretty funny moments, and at least I remember him, which I can't say for Red and Blue on this team. And hey, he had that one really good focus episode with his dad. He's just very been there, done that, and there's nothing that interesting to him. Finally, we've got Miki Momozono, Goggle Pink, played by Megumi Ogawa. She's the girl, she's fine. It's nice to have another female ranger again, and I do like her, but she's definitely not as well fleshed out of a character as someone like Peggy, or hell, even Misa from the last season. She had some good episodes, and she was sweet. Miki is harmless, and I don't have any problems with her, but, not much to say. But hey, there's always the next season, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I've said all there is to say about Dr. Hongo. He barely classifies as a character. As for the computer boys and girls, they're a bit more interesting. They seem to be a sort of evolution of the group of kids from Denji Man, being the next generation that looks up to and aspires to be like the Rangers when they grow up. Despite this, I still kind of prefer the Denji-Man ones. The fact that they were normal kids helped sell the idea a lot better. Sure, this is the show where they outright say the kids are training to be the next generation, but these kids are already trained in computer science and technical know-how, so to an audience of children at home, I imagine Denji-Man's group would feel much more relatable, and therefore more effective. It also helps that the Denji-Man kids didn't feel like they were designed in a lab to fit their respective ranger mentors. Still, I don't dislike the Comboys, and they serve their purpose well enough. Death Dark is, much like the heroes, very simple and to the point. These guys don't get nearly as much development as the villains in the 2 previous seasons. Starting with Iguana and Zazoria, they were only around for the first 15 episodes, so I don't have much to say. They were the bumbling duo who often argued. They're easily the most forgettable of the bunch, and I never really cared about them. Mazurka is equally just alright. She at least has way more screen time, but she's also not interesting in any way. Compared to even Amazon Killer, she just never did it for me. And as I've mentioned, her death really was a waste. She just blows herself up and ultimately doesn't accomplish anything. They couldn't even have the Rangers be the ones to take her down. Deathkiller feels like budget Hedera from Denji-Man, except without any of the things that made Hedera a mildly interesting character. He's just an angry dude who's good at sword fighting. I like his costume, and he is relatively menacing, but there's nothing else there. Führer Taboo is yet another big bad final boss. As I said, I love his design, and he is very intimidating. Still, his defeat was, again, a bit too easy. Granted, he did put up a better fight than some of his predecessors, but yeah. All they had to do was stab him in the eye. Deathmark is my favorite of the bunch, if only because he has the coolest look and he's the most intimidating and powerful. I know that sounds shallow, but that's what you get when these are the most one-dimensional characters you can come up with. This guy at least had presence. And he was also easily the most competent of all the villains in this one. And that's really the problem with all the characters here, and the season as a whole, isn't it? They're all very surface level. Go Ranger had this issue as well, but that show had such a charming, fun 70s vibe, as well as cool spy action to set it apart from other Sentais. Denji-Man had surface-level heroes, but the villains were genuinely interesting. Even Sun Vulcan, despite its mostly terrible main cast, had some honestly good characters sprinkled in there. Goggle V's characters aren't unlikable or annoying like the previous show, but none of them left a great impression on me either. Kanpei is the closest, but that's mostly thanks to his actor and not his writing. As a show, I can't say Goggle 5 is bad, but it's nothing special either. It's okay at best, and there's no reason to seek it out when other Sentai from the same time period outshine it easily. Battle Fever, for all its faults, was still a more interesting watch for me. Still, this was a better experience than Sun Vulcan, and if you don't mind endless filler, I honestly think you could have a fun time with this one. There's plenty of good moments individually, and some fun episodes, the performances are fine, none of the characters annoyed me, and I struggle to find any actual criticisms of the show other than it's bland and basic. For me, the main problem really was the lack of a proper ongoing story. For a main writer who's known for his story-centric works, this is really underwhelming. But hey, there's always next time. The reign of Hirohisa Soda didn't exactly start off with a bang, but a bang is what's coming, since the next season is completely different from any that has come before. Super Sentai is evolving into a new form. Join me next time as we burst into the next season, Kagaku Sentai Dynaman.
Dai Sentai Goggle V.
We also get a one-on-one battle between Kenichi and General Carr to save... Carr? Did I fucking say General... I wrote General Carr on the script because I was watching Dynaman when I was... Oh, god damn it! That's the wrong general.